You awaken on tatami, soaked with your own sweat. The room is dark, but not silent. You hear the faint crackle of a dying charcoal brazier, the hiss of night insects beyond the paper walls, and somewhere, the slow drip of water echoing from a bamboo pipe. The air smells of camellia oil, pressed from flowers long since fallen, mixed with the stale scent of ash. It clings to your skin, heavier than the silk that barely covers your thighs. Your heart beats quietly, not fast, just steady, resigned. You've been awake longer than you'll admit, waiting for the sound you knew would come. The sliding door creaks open, not fast, not with warning, just enough to break the stillness that pretends to be peace. The light behind it spills in like the glow of a paper lantern floating over a grave. You blink, not because it's bright, but because you hate the way it reveals the shape standing in the frame. She enters, the madam. She does not ask if you slept well. She does not look for bruises. She does not check if you've eaten. Her sandals whisper against the floor. Her robe, black with rust-colored embroidery, drags behind her like a spill of dried blood. Her voice is calm, but practiced, controlled, like someone who's repeated this script too many times to count. Prepare, she says. You wait, because she always follows it with something else. The room feels colder as she pauses by the threshold. She adjusts the lacquered pins in her hair. Then, almost as an afterthought, tonight, the Lord returns. The door closes behind her, and the silence returns. But it's changed. No longer waiting. Now it's watching. You sit upright, your body already aching before you move. Muscles that should have belonged to a child now carry memories older than most men survive. You pull the thin robe tighter around your chest. It smells of sweat that isn't yours. Somewhere in the room is a basin. You don't remember standing up, but your knees find the floor beside it. The water inside is cold, as it always is, because warmth is not for you. You dip your fingers in and flinch, not from the temperature, but from the memory of the last time you were told to prepare. You press the cloth to your neck. Wipe the hollow between your collarbones, under your arms, between your thighs, the parts of yourself that feel the most distant. It isn't cleansing, it's rehearsing. You look down at your reflection in the basin. What little of it can be seen in the stillness, and all you can think is how you've begun to resemble the others. The boys whose names you never learned. The ones who used to scream. The ones who stopped. You don't speak. You haven't for days. No one asks you questions anymore. You're spoken to, spoken about, but never spoken with. Somewhere in the hallway, you hear the soft clang of a tray being set down. Someone else being dressed. Somewhere, another boy is being told the same thing you were told. Prepare. The word means something different in this house. It does not mean ready yourself. It means erase yourself. Leave only what pleases, and be silent about the rest. You tighten your sash. You straighten your back. You wait. And outside, beyond the paper-thin wall, the sound of hooves and carriage wheels grinds against the gravel. Lanterns light the path. Men laugh. Boots strike the ground in measured rhythm. And in that moment, you feel something move through your chest that isn't fear. It's memory. The last time he came. You heard the boy in the room beside yours beg not to be chosen. You heard the door open anyway. You heard what came after. And then you heard nothing at all. You close your eyes now, not to rest, but to vanish. Because tonight, your turn returns. And you must not speak. You must not cry. You must only obey. You were born a son. Tonight, you are a silhouette behind silk, and the screen is sliding open. If this makes your stomach turn, you need to subscribe. And if you won't, tell us why in the comments. Maybe the boy in this story deserves to know why his pain isn't worth a click. You were born beneath a gray sky, in a village where names mattered only to the people who gave them. Tohoku's winters were long, the kind that stole crops from the soil and breath from newborns. But spring always came back, briefly, and with plum blossoms that didn't last long enough. You were the third son, not the first who inherits, not the second who replaces, but the one who watches, the one who listens. Your father worked the land with hands like cracked bark, and your mother sang while she ground millet, her voice as worn and quiet as the robe she wore. Your name, whispered at night when she thought you were asleep, was spoken like a promise, Haru, meaning spring. You were supposed to bring warmth. By the time you were old enough to carry water, you had already learned silence. You understood how to walk without drawing attention, how to swallow hunger without complaint, how to listen to your father curse the clouds when the rain never came. You were 5 when your older brother buried your family's only ox. 6 when you learned how to read the worry in your father's jaw. 7 when the first loan was taken. 8 when he took another. There was a time you believed your life would be spent in those muddy fields, your hands inside the same soil your grandfather died in. And maybe it would have been if the sun hadn't stayed too long one year, if the river hadn't dried into a cracked vein, if your family hadn't stared at a storage shed filled with nothing but mold. It was the year the debt collectors returned with smiles, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. They sat at the low table and drank the last of your barley tea as they offered your father a solution. "There's a noble house in the city," one of them said. "They're looking for household help. It is an opportunity." They didn't mention what kind of house it was. Your father didn't look at you when he agreed. That night, your mother didn't sleep. She cut your hair with a kitchen blade, slowly, carefully, pausing each time her hands shook too much. Your hair had always been long. It was the only thing she had ever said made you look like the gods in the temple scrolls. She wrapped the strands in cloth when she was done, tied the bundle with thread from her wedding robe, and placed it in your hand. "Don't lose this," she said. "So you remember who you were." She gave you the hair. She gave you your name. And then she kissed your forehead like she was sealing both to your skin. You didn't cry. Not then. The cart came in the morning. The same wheels that once brought rice to your door now rolled you away from it. Your father lifted you inside without words. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from staring into something he couldn't fight. Your mother stayed behind. She bowed when the cart began to move, her hands on the floor, her forehead touching the wood. She stayed that way long after you turned the corner and could no longer see the house. But you saw her shadow in the dust that trailed behind the oxen. That was the last home you had. The city was not what they promised. It was louder, dirtier, more crowded. The sky looked further away. The mountains were gone, replaced by paper lanterns strung like bait across empty streets. You were taken through alleys where boys with shaved heads stared with eyes too old for their faces. You smelled incense and something underneath it, sweat, smoke, sake. You passed women with painted mouths and men who watched without blinking. No one told you where you were going until the door closed behind you. They said nothing when they took your clothes. They didn't ask before they cut your fingernails, wash your face with something sharp, or rubbed oil into your arms. They called you pretty. And then they stopped calling you anything. That night, you slept on a folded blanket in a room that did not belong to you. You pressed your hand to your chest where your mother's bundle had been. It was gone. You never saw it again. You didn't even know when they had taken it. What you had left was the name they no longer used, and a silence that didn't feel like peace anymore. The cart creaked as it moved through Kyoto. You sat inside, back pressed against a cage of smooth bamboo bars. The city passed in broken glimpses between the slats. Temple roofs carved with dragons, flags fluttering with the family crests of men who had never starved, women with white-painted faces laughing behind fans. It might have looked beautiful once if you had arrived as a visitor. But when you enter as cargo, beauty turns to mockery. Every bell chime, every lantern, every scent of roasted chestnuts in the air becomes a sound, a color, a smell that doesn't belong to you. You did not know how far you traveled, but your legs ached from the shaking of the cart by the time it stopped. A gate opened with a groan that seemed to sigh from the building itself. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Prestige didn't live in public display. It lived behind walls high enough to hide what no one dared speak of. 2 men in matching black robes stood by the entrance. Neither of them looked at you. They didn't need to. You were led down a stone path lined with koi ponds and pine trees, sculpted into unnatural elegance. The gravel crunched beneath soft slippers that weren't yours. You hadn't been given shoes. Inside, the air changed. The house smelled like sandalwood, camellia oil, and powder. Clean, polished, scented, everything scrubbed to the outside world. A woman approached, her face painted, her sleeves long enough to hide her hands, her voice soft enough to sound merciful even when she said things that stripped you bare. "Remove that," she said, pointing to your kimono. You hesitated. Only a second. But hesitation is a crime in places like this. Two boys stepped forward and pulled the fabric from your shoulders. The air hit your skin like it was made of eyes. No one said anything about the scars on your back, the bruises on your knees, the dust that clung to your feet. No one needed to. You were taken to a bath. The water was hot enough to burn. You didn't scream. The older boy, maybe 16, maybe younger, held your arms beneath the surface and whispered instructions as if they were a prayer. Don't speak unless asked. Never lift your eyes. Smile if you're touched. Breathe quietly. Always say thank you. You nodded. You didn't understand. Not yet. But your body did. Your body had already begun the work of disappearing. They scrubbed you until your skin stung. They soaked your hair in oil until it gleamed like lacquer. They rubbed powders across your chest, your thighs, your throat. You were dressed not in robes, but in a performance. Silk pattern with cranes and plum blossoms. A sash so tight it made breathing feel like confession. The older boys taught you more. Not with books, with silence, with looks, with gentle corrections that carried the weight of punishment behind them. How to kneel properly. How to smile without showing teeth. How to keep your voice like water, soft, calm, never rising unless asked to. How to wash another's feet without flinching. How to listen to cruel words and bow as though they were compliments. You learned quickly, not because you were clever, because fear makes a better teacher than love. The inner quarters were a different world. The laughter you heard at the front of the house did not echo here. The floorboards did not creak. The doors did not slam. Everything was padded, softened, dulled. Even the crying. Your bed was not a bed. It was a cushion on the floor beside 6 others. The boys around you whispered in the dark. Not about escape, not about rebellion. Just memories. One missed the smell of mackerel on the fire. Another missed the way his sister braided his hair. One hadn't spoken in days. They all had names once. Now, they had positions. Senior, junior, favorite, discarded. Your first night came faster than you expected. They didn't tell you. They never do. You were combing your hair when the madam appeared at the doorway and nodded. That was the only warning. A woman led you to the perfumed corridor. You walked barefoot over silk runners painted with scenes of the imperial court, geisha playing flutes, samurai sipping tea. The irony twisted in your gut. They painted peace where there was none. The room was dark when you entered. Lanterns low, incense burning in curls. The man sat behind a veil of thin fabric. You saw his silhouette first, still waiting. You knelt. You bowed. You said what they taught you to say. I am honored. The screen lifted. The man was not old, not young, not cruel in the way that shouts. He smiled. He poured wine. He asked your name. You gave it. He frowned. No, he said. That's too rough. Too peasant. We'll call you Kiku, like the flower. And just like that, your name died. It was not a ceremony. There was no mourning. It simply vanished, replaced by something prettier. Something easier to say in a moan. You performed. You were praised. You were paid in approval. You returned to your cushion and stared at the ceiling until morning. You didn't cry. You couldn't. The name they buried wasn't just your own. It was the last thing that belonged to you. The house was quiet in the day, almost holy. Tatamas swept, incense lit, servants bowing in slow unison like ripples across a still pond. Guests arrived with their heads high, their voices measured, their silks untouched by weather or work. They spoke of art and philosophy, quoting Zen verses and Confucian maxims with ease. They praised self-restraint, humility, and balance. They sipped tea while their hands rested on swords they no longer needed to draw. Men born into power who wore civility like a mask they forgot to remove at night. You served them during these hours, kneeling by the doorframe with a tray balanced in shaking hands. They rarely looked at you then, at least not directly. You were background, decoration, a soft step on polished floors, a silence that moved. They asked questions only when they wanted to feel generous. Where are you from? How old are you? Can you sing? You answered with practiced grace. Your voice was gentle, your tone grateful. They liked that. They liked when you lowered your eyes, but not your shoulders. When your voice carried pain, but not resistance. They said you were refined, polished, promising. And then night came. The same men who quoted sutras in the daylight asked to see your skin under candlelight. They asked you to kneel in their chambers, not at the threshold, but beside their futons. They no longer called you Kiku, or any name. They touched your jaw to angle your face to the moonlight and said you were art. That your suffering gave you a look the others didn't have. They said these things as if they were compliments. You learned quickly that your beauty was not something you wore. It was something they took, a currency they passed between themselves, a kind of wealth they could spend again and again without ever asking if you were running empty. You heard the word wakashu whispered down the halls, not from the guests, but from the older boys, said with the kind of irony that tastes like rust. It meant beautiful boy. It meant neither child nor man, but something in between, an object in transition, molded for pleasure, framed by a culture that dressed abuse in ceremony. In the Edo quarters, wakashu were praised in public, desired in private, erased in memory. You read it in their behavior. On the street, a nobleman might bow to a priest and speak of honor. But inside the screen door, that same man whispered instructions no child should ever hear. They praised clarity and restraint, then drank until their speech slurred and their breath reeked of rice wine. They spoke of stillness while their hands moved like fire over skin that hadn't healed from the night before. You no longer spoke unless instructed, not because you forgot how, but because you understood what words could cost. Praise became poison. Each time a guest said you were his favorite, your stomach turned, because favorites are kept close. And when they're broken, they're discarded faster. You saw it happen. A boy named Riku once smiled too brightly at a guest joke. The next morning, he was gone. No explanation, just a folded robe on an empty mat. Another boy, Akira, was chosen 5 nights in a row. On the 6th, he walked into the koi pond and never came out. They drained it the next day and said nothing. You were not seen. You were chosen. That's different. Being seen means being understood. Being chosen means being used. And they chose you often. Your face was on painted scrolls gifted between guests. Not as a portrait, as decoration. Your body, outlined in gold ink, lay across silk like it was an offering. They praised your stillness. They complimented your posture. They loved how obedient you'd become. You had learned how to disappear while still being visible. The older boys whispered about those who never left the estate. Not because they weren't sold or killed, but because they changed, became quiet, became willing, became useful in ways the younger ones hadn't yet mastered. They said when the change happened, you were no longer wakashu. You were something else, a pet, a servant, a possession. You wonder when your moment had happened. Was it the 3rd time you served the same guest? The first time you didn't flinch? The last time you caught a glimpse of yourself in the lacquered door and felt nothing? At night, the laughter from the front rooms carried through the paper walls. The clinking of cups, the sliding of doors, the low, rhythmic sounds of men who wanted not company, but conquest. You stared at the ceiling and counted each breath like it was a step down into a tunnel you no longer had the light to climb out of. You remembered your mother's voice. Not what she said, just the sound, the shape of it in your memory, the way it wrapped around your name like it mattered. You hadn't heard your name in months. You never would again. They didn't write his name in any scrolls. Will you write yours under this video instead, with a subscription? Or will you stay silent, like the men who watched and did nothing? You are woken before the sun, long before the sound of birdsong, in a house that never truly sleeps. A tap on the floor outside your door. No knock. They don't knock for you. In the dim light, the madam waits with your costume. She does not call it that, but you understand what it is. The layered silks, the embroidered sash, the painted touches around your eyes, the rouge applied to your lips to suggest softness that isn't there. These things are not garments. They are armor for a performance no one applauds. Tonight, you are entertainment, but that word no longer means what it once did. They place the shamisen in your hands. 3 strings stretched across a polished body carved from old wood and lacquered black, like the eyes of a man who pays for what he believes he deserves. You play it well. The older boys taught you. It was not a question. You were told you must learn to be graceful, not just in your steps, but in the way you hold an audience's hunger. Play the melody. Smile. Let the song distract them from the weight of their desires until they can no longer separate rhythm from breathing. Your fingers move with practiced ease. You pluck the notes even when your wrists ache from the last guest who thought your body could bend further than it should. The strings never slip, but sometimes your voice does. Because tonight, they do not want the song. They want the singer. In the outer quarters, geisha are given camellias in porcelain vases. Their laughter is courted, their refusals respected. They belong to a higher stage. An art, an elegance. You too wear powder and paint. But when the doors close behind the last drumbeat, they remove their wigs and go home. You are the home. You do not leave with your music. You remain. You serve. You are poured into silence like water into a cracked bowl, leaking behind every closed mouth you keep. The guests begin to arrive. Tonight, it is a merchant celebration. His son has reached manhood, or so he claims. The guests are drunk before the first plate is cleared. Their voices rise with wine, their posture collapsing into the same shape you see every night, power sinking into indulgence. You kneel in the center of the room and begin to play. The tune is bright, like bird song over blood. They ask you to sing. You do. Your voice is clear, but your eyes blur from the sake someone poured down your throat moments before. The room spins, and the candlelight melts faces into animal shapes. They laugh. One reaches forward and tugs at your sleeve. Another comments on your posture. A third says you're prettier when you smile. You smile. Not because you want to, but because not smiling has consequences. The music stops. Someone takes the shamisen from your lap. A man stands behind you now. You can feel the heat of his breath, the way his fingers slide under your collar with the casual greed of someone used to taking. Sing another, he says, as his hands travel lower. But slower this time. You do. Your voice trembles, not from nerves, but from memory. Because this has happened before. This will happen again. The same command, the same sequence, the same feeling of your robe loosening as the last note leaves your mouth. He tells you you're lucky. He says some boys don't get chosen twice. You say nothing. He laughs and says silence is your most beautiful quality. Behind you, the madam watches. She does not intervene. She taught you how to keep your face still, how to twist your shoulders so the bruises won't show in the morning, how to breathe into your stomach so you won't make a sound when it matters most. She taught you how to smile with your eyes open, how to moan with gratitude, how to disappear in the most elegant way. Afterwards, the man slips a coin into your sash. The room applauds. You bow. You walk out of the chamber like your legs still belong to you. But inside, something flickers. Not rage, not resistance, just a question. Quiet, small, dangerous. What would happen if you didn't bow next time? What would happen if you screamed? But you don't, because tonight isn't the end. It's only the middle of another performance. Another act in a life where the curtain never falls. And when you return to your chamber, you find a flower on your mat. Not a gift, a mark. Someone has reserved you for tomorrow. You're older now, not in years, but in silence. In how easily your body obeys before your mind can catch up. In how the bruises fade faster than they used to. Not because they're lighter, but because you've stopped remembering where they came from. The flower left on your mat has become a common sight. A signal, a sentence. You don't need to ask who left it. You don't want to know. You just dress, paint your face, and wait. But tonight, you're not summoned. You're assigned. The madam calls you to the front of the estate. Not to perform, but to assist. A new delivery has arrived. 3 boys, barefoot, dust on their legs. Hair tangled, eyes wide the way yours once were when you still believed you'd be returning home. They don't speak, not because they've been taught yet, but because they're still stunned by how quickly everything was taken from them. You don't ask their names. You won't be told. They're dead, paid in flesh. One lost a father in a fire. Another comes from fishing village, washed out by flood. The third was promised a position as a temple attendant, until his family realized a noble household offered a better payout. Boys offered to wealthy men has never been new. It is simply polished now, wrapped in paper fans and sealed behind noble crests. In the Edo period, it had a name. Nanshoku, male colors. A practice so embedded in the elite that it was once discussed in the same breath as poetry, as loyalty, as art. Books were written, praising the bond between an older male patron and a beautiful youth. They called it refined, spiritual, an extension of warrior culture. But behind those verses, beneath the poems and painted scrolls, were rooms like this, boys like these, and men who spoke of love while breaking children apart. You lead them to the bath. You show them where to scrub. You show them how to hold the towel across their waist, just so. You show them how to bow. Not too low, not too long, with eyes tilted downward but not lifeless. You watch them struggle to memorize movements that you no longer think about. You remember how hard it was to breathe with the sash tied too tightly. How long it took you to learn to smile without meaning it. Some of them won't make it. Not all boys last more than a season. They arrive full of confusion, sometimes hope, sometimes belief that this is temporary. But the body breaks in quiet ways. It's not just the beatings. It's the forgetting. Forgetting how to speak without flinching. Forgetting the feeling of being called by your real name. Forgetting that your life once belonged to you. You see it happen slowly. First, their posture changes. The shoulders begin to tilt inward. Then they start to look down, not out of training, but because looking up feels dangerous. And then they start smiling at everything, even pain, even cruelty. That's when you know they've crossed the line between surviving and surrendering. The madam assigns you to mentor them, not because she trusts you, but because you become efficient. She says your presence calms the new ones. What she means is you no longer scream. You no longer ask questions. You're the perfect shape for them to copy. You help one of the boys, maybe 12, tie his robe. He won't meet your eyes. You recognize the trembling in his hands. You place your palms over his wrists and whisper only once. It doesn't mean you stop being a person. Just hide it deeper. He nods, but you're not sure he understood. You escort him to the dressing room. A servant hands you the box of oils and powders. You kneel behind him, brushing his hair until it's smooth, drawing a thin line of red beneath each eye. You used to hate doing this. Now, it's just another part of the silence. That night, one of them is summoned. Not the oldest, not the prettiest, just the quietest. He leaves the room with a flower in his sash and doesn't speak a word. The next morning, he returns with a limp and a blood stain on his inner sleeve. He's told to bathe and report for duties again before dusk. No one looks surprised. No one looks at all. You take his place, preparing the others. At some point, you stop asking which one will disappear next. You just try to teach them quickly enough that their first night doesn't kill them. And if it does, you make sure someone lights incense in their place. It started with a glance. Not the kind that invites. Not the kind that tempts. Just a moment. A flicker of recognition between two things that were supposed to be invisible. He stood beside you during the evening preparation, his hands dipping cloth into the bathwater, his sleeves damp from the splash. He didn't speak. Neither did you. But you looked, and he looked back. It was the first time in months that anyone had seen you without wanting something. You didn't know his name. They didn't use names here. But he had a scar that curved just below his right eye. You wondered who gave it to him, whether it was a guest, or whether, like yours, it was punishment for something as small as delay. He never smiled, not with his mouth. But when he moved, it was quieter than the others. You watched how he folded linens like they weren't tools of suffering. How he took extra time rinsing out the bowls after meals. How he left the window open just a little longer during cleaning, letting the sun warm the floor where your knees would later press. No one told him to. No one noticed. But you did. You spoke once, weeks later. It was barely more than a whisper. A warning, really. The tea tray was misaligned. The madam's mood had already soured that day. You tapped the edge with your finger, just enough for him to correct it. He nodded. That night, he shared a towel with you during bathing. He handed it to you without words. His knuckles were bruised. You wanted to ask. But in a house like this, questions are weapons, blades that cut both the speaker and the spoken to. So you looked down, and he understood. Over time, the silence between you became a language. You learned to read the way he moved. When he was tired, when he was in pain, when he was returned from a room with his steps uneven and his voice hoarse. You left a folded robe by his mat once. He left half of his fruit portion for you the next day. Small gestures, barely noticeable, but in a place where every inch of your body is owned. Even a moment of choice is sacred. The others saw it. They didn't say anything, but they saw. Possession in this house belongs only to the master. That includes your thoughts, your friendships, your eyes. Any connection outside of what is permitted is a threat, and threats are dealt with quickly. One morning, he was gone. No warning, no explanation. His mat was stripped. His belongings, what little he had, were swept into a basket and taken away. You asked nothing, but your stomach twisted when the madam entered later that day and told you to kneel in the courtyard. You obeyed. She spoke calmly, like always. Affection weakens discipline, she said. Your job is to entertain, not attach. Then she stepped aside. The overseer stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The bamboo rod in his hand spoke loudly enough. They whipped you 10 times. Not for love, not for disobedience, but for suggestion, for the illusion that you might have something left that hadn't already been sold. You bit your tongue until it bled, not to be brave, but because you knew the punishment would double if you cried out. Afterward, they left you in the rain to wash the blood away. That night, you returned to your mat. You didn't sleep. You stared at the empty space where he used to lie, where his breath used to steady your own in the quiet hours after suffering. You remembered how his fingertips brushed yours in the corridor, how you once shared warmth beneath a winter robe, how once, when he thought you were asleep, he traced the scar on your wrist and whispered a word you hadn't heard in years. Havu. You hadn't been called that since your mother cut your hair. You never told him it was your name, but somehow he knew. Now, all you have is the memory, not his body, but of his presence. The only soul in that place who ever saw you as more than silence wrapped in skin. You never saw him again. They say he was sold to a merchant house in the south. Others say he ran, and they killed him before he reached the gates. You don't ask. You don't want to know, because both answers in the same way. He's gone, and you are still here. He arrived during the late rains, escorted by 2 attendants with faces like stone and hands that never touched the ground. His robes were ink dark, lined with gold thread that caught the light like a whisper too loud. He stepped over the threshold of the house without removing his sandals, and no one corrected him. Power never does. They said he was a philosopher, a scholar from the capital, that his words had been carved into lacquered scrolls, that lords read his essays beside their beds, that his voice echoed in court halls where policy and poetry met. He bowed to the madam like she was an equal, but when he turned to the rest of you, his eyes moved with the detachment of a man examining livestock. He asked to speak with you, not touch, not taste, just speak. That was rare. So you were brought to him, cleaned, powdered, dressed in a robe one size too small, hair pulled back tight enough to sharpen your features. He gestured for you to kneel, then sat across from you, folding his legs with the ease of someone who spent more time in thought than in labor. On the table between you, a single candle flickered. It cast long shadows across his face. They made his smile look softer than it was. He began with Confucius. He recited passages from memory, lectures on order, on duty, on the purity of the self. His voice was low and even, as if he were lecturing a classroom, not a concubine. You nodded when he paused. You had learned to nod at the right times. It kept things simpler. He spoke of virtue. He spoke of restraint. He said the body is a vessel, and that suffering is the root of clarity. Then he asked you how long you'd been there. You said, I do not count the days. He called that wisdom. He touched your wrist, not with urgency, but with the curiosity of someone measuring something fragile. A line of tension traveled through your chest, but you did not move. He let go. He asked if you were happy. You said, I am grateful. He said that was enough. That night, he asked for 3 boys. Not 1, 3. They were told he wanted to question them, that he was writing a treatise on emotional discipline. They were taken to his quarters. You saw them the next morning. One limped. One refused to speak. One was gone. The madam said he was returned to his family, that his contract had been bought out by a generous patron. But no one believed that. You understood something that day. Knowledge doesn't mean mercy. The ones who speak of virtue are often the most skilled in dressing cruelty as curiosity. The scholar returned the next evening. He asked for you again. You were sent without ceremony. You were instructed to pour his tea. He watched you do it without blinking. He said, "I envy your silence." He spoke again of discipline. He quoted Mencius this time, on human nature, on righteousness. You remembered how the younger boy had cried walking back to the bathhouse. You remembered the stain on his robe. And yet, this man sat before you now, speaking of harmony and justice, while his hands reached for your knee beneath the table. You didn't stop him. You didn't flinch. You just breathed. That was enough to make him say you were his favorite. In that moment, something inside you fractured, not from fear, but from the understanding that there was no contradiction in his mind, that a man could write about the balance of heaven and earth, about the purity of thought, and still believe your body was his to break, because you didn't exist in his world as a soul, only as a shape. The more they spoke of virtue, the more they violated it. It wasn't ignorance. It was convenient, a mask they wore not to deceive others, but to excuse themselves. He left the house after 5 days. He bowed deeply. He praised the discipline of the staff. He gifted a scroll to the madam, his own writing. You watched as she bowed in return, smiling with her painted mouth. Then she turned to you and said, "He wants to recommend you to the governor." And just like that, you were upgraded. Not because you had healed, but because you had endured. You no longer flinch when the door slides open. You no longer brace when footsteps stop behind you. There was a time when your muscles would tighten, your breath would catch, and your body would lean toward escape, even when escape was impossible. But now, the body doesn't resist. The mind no longer warrants. You've trained yourself out of reflex, out of fear, out of hope. There is a silence inside you deeper than the one outside. It's not peace. It's not calm. It's vacancy, a kind of stillness that only comes when the last part of yourself that could be broken finally stops, trying to hold its shape. You rise when called. You serve when asked. You kneel when expected. You don't think about how many years it's been. You stopped counting after the last boy you remembered by name disappeared without a sound. You remember his voice, but not his face. You remember his crying, but not what they did to him. The madam trusts you now, not as a person, as a function. You know the guests, their preferences, their appetites, their rituals. You know which ones demand submission without sound, and which ones enjoy a struggle before they conquer. You know who drinks too much, and who prefers boys who look afraid. You know when to offer wine, and when to offer flesh. And now you help choose. It began quietly. A nod from the madam during selection. A glance toward the line of new arrivals. She asked your opinion once. Just once. You answered. Not with feeling. With precision. She nodded again. The next time, she asked you to assign the rooms. And after that, she gave you the list. You don't know what disturbed you more, that she asked, or that you knew exactly how to answer. The new boys look at you differently. They think you are safe, that your quietness is kindness, that you will protect them. They ask questions you no longer have the language to answer. Will it hurt? Will they stop? Will I go home? You tell them what they need to hear. Not because it's true, but because it's useful. Calm boys fetch higher praise. Screaming boys disappear faster. You tell them they're lucky. You tell them this is a place of order, of honor, of service. You tell them what you were told. And if they believe it, just long enough to get through their first night, then you've done your job. But one night, something changes. He can't be older than 10. Thin wrists. Eyes too large for his face. He's dressed in silks he doesn't yet know how to wear. You're helping him tie his sash when he speaks. Not loud. Not defiant. Just honest. I want to go home. You pause. Just for a second. But he notices. His hands tremble when he looks up at you. Do you remember your home? He asks. And you don't answer. Because you don't. You try to search for the image. A roof. A name. A scent. But it's gone. There are fragments, yes. A mother's voice. A night wind over rice fields. the weight of a wooden bowl in your hands, but they don't feel like memories. They feel like borrowed dreams, echoes of someone else's story. The boy looks at you. He waits. You place your hand gently on his shoulder. You smile the way they taught you, the same way you did when you were first painted, first offered, first taken. Then you lead him to the guest chamber. You watch the door close behind him, and you walk away. You don't pray. You don't curse. You don't cry. You return to your mat and sit in silence. Not mourning, not guilt, just absence. You understand now what they meant when they said you were ready. It wasn't about poise or posture. It was about becoming hollow enough to be filled with other people's pleasures. About shedding identity until you're no longer a boy, not even a body, just a shape. The soul doesn't shatter all at once. It crumbles in layers. And this was the last. The letter arrives like all the others, with no fanfare, with no emotion. It is delivered by the same servant who hands you the tea. He does not look at you, and you do not look at him. The envelope is plain, sealed with red wax. The name of the sender, just an insignia you have come to recognize as the seal of the military. Another assignment, another patron, another future cut short. You are told to kneel. You open the letter, and your fingers are steady as you read the words. You are to be transferred immediately to the estate of Lord Kagema, a commander of the eastern military districts. He is in need of a personal servant. The words linger, but they don't matter. You do not fear them. You do not hope for them. You only accept them as you accept all things in this life. Without hesitation, without thought, just the dull certainty that it will end one way or another. You wonder if the others will notice, if they'll ask why, but no one will. No one dares. You've seen it before. The older boys are moved every few seasons. You watch them walk away with eyes that are not their own. Their bodies are still there, but their souls left years ago. But this time, the rumors are different. You overhear them, whispered between breaths as the others prepare for the night. They say Lord Kagema burns his concubines alive when they age. He keeps them for the beauty, the youth. But when they show signs of fading, he casts them into the fire as though they were no more than wood. They say the scent of burning flesh lingers in the hallways of his house. They say some boys never make it to his estate. They simply vanish along the road. The first time you hear it, you don't believe it. It's just a story, a tale for the younger ones to hide their fear. You've heard worse. But this time, the whisper gnaws at your bones in a way that makes it harder to breathe. You are told nothing more. The cart arrives. You are moved. You are placed in his chamber. The heavy silk curtains. The massive four-poster bed. The smell of incense, so thick it chokes the air. Lord Kagema sits at the far end of the room, examining you with eyes that cut through the layers of cloth and silence. He says nothing. His hands never leave his sword. And then, when it seems like the night will pass like all the others, one of the older boys comes to you, silent as death, his footsteps soft but firm. He hands you something wrapped in cloth. A blade. It's light but sharp. You see the glint in the candlelight and know what it means before he speaks. You have 3 choices, he whispers. You can kill him, kill yourself, or stay and watch more boys die. He looks at you for a long moment. His face is ashen, his eyes dark with knowing. The choice is heavy, too heavy for anyone who's lived the life you have. You don't know if this is an offer of mercy or simply another cruelty wrapped in a choice. You don't know if you will live long enough to make it. But the weight of the blade in your palm feels like an answer in itself. You have the power to end it. You wonder how much it would hurt to do it. To take this blade, so small in your hand, but carrying a lifetime of suffering, and end it all. To feel the cut, the release, the escape. No more nights of waiting for a master's touch. No more bruises. No more memories that fade like old dreams. You wonder what it would feel like to die on your own terms, to make the choice before someone else makes it for you. But you also know the weight of survival. You know what it means to choose to breathe when every breath is suffocating you. You know what it means to bend, to break, to endure. You know how to make your heart beat quietly, how to swallow pain without a sound, how to become a shadow behind your own eyes. And in that moment, a strange clarity settles over you. The same clarity you've had since the day you stepped into this house of men. You are not free. You never were. But you're still here. And even if you're nothing more than an object, you are an object that still survives. You don't use the blade. You hide it under your mattress, next to the soft fabric where your memories used to live. The next day, Lord Kyle Mesa arrives. His eyes trace over your body, pausing just long enough to ensure you've learned your place. His hands move with the grace of a man who's made his living breaking bodies. He doesn't speak, and you don't speak either. You are just another shadow in the house. You leave the blade behind. It's not because you're afraid to use it, not because you still hope for something, anything, more than the dark path that stretches ahead. You leave it behind because you understand something now. Death doesn't offer you freedom. It only gives you a moment's silence, and you've learned that silence is not an escape. Silence is a sentence. You walk through the halls as if they belong to you. You've forgotten what it feels like to feel the weight of your own steps. You've forgotten what it's like to care about what comes next. Your body moves of its own accord, automatically, methodically, like the others, like the men who have lived this life longer than you. You've learned to shed your skin, to wear a mask so thin that no one sees the face beneath it. You pass the doors. The guests laugh. The music swells. The candles flicker. You walk through the same corridors where you once felt the heat of eyes on your skin, where you once felt the sting of hands that owned you. But now the touch no longer burns. You've learned to wear it as armor, as camouflage, as part of the air you breathe. The night stretches ahead, but the weight of it no longer feels like your burden. Not tonight. Tonight, you have something to do. You find the quietest corner of the estate, the one that smells faintly of moss and old wood. There's a wall tile, a small one, easily overlooked by those who have passed this way before. You take your finger and you press it against the cold surface. The tile is smooth, but underneath the smoothness, you feel the texture of the plaster, a texture that has held secrets for generations. Secrets that have been swallowed by walls, buried beneath the weight of luxury, of lives that didn't matter. You begin to scratch, slow at first, but then harder as the words begin to form. I was once a boy. The message is simple. It is the truth, reduced to its most basic form. A boy, not an object, not a plaything, not a thing to be used and discarded. Just a boy, the one who once ran barefoot through the fields, whose laughter was not a weapon, but a gift. You finish the words. Your fingers ache, but you don't stop. You want them to be seen. Even if they're never heard, you want them to be remembered. You step back and stare at the scratchings you've made in the wall. It's not much. It's not a rebellion. It's not an act of defiance, not in the way they think of it. It's a whisper in a world that has forgotten how to listen. A whisper that will fade with time, like everything else that's been forgotten. But it's still there. Someone might see it. Someone might read those words and know that there was a time, just a moment in the endless march of history, when a boy named Haru lived, when he existed in the world as something more than what they made him become. You step away from the wall, and your heart is heavy with something that feels almost like relief. The kind of relief that comes when you finally stop pretending that you can escape, that you can outrun the truth of your existence. The door opens behind you. The shadows shift. And you know, without turning, that the night has begun again. The night is different now. The walls seem thinner. The air colder. You move like a ghost through a house that no longer feels like it holds your name or even your soul. It's the same house, but now you see it differently. You see the gilded frames, the lacquered surfaces, the silken curtains, and you understand something deeper, something more troubling. These things were never built for beauty. They were built for concealment. They were built to cover up what no one wants to see. The laughter behind the walls, the perfume that clings to the air, it all hides something darker, something that has been hidden for centuries. You were never meant to be a part of the beauty. You were always meant to be part of the hidden. Your eyes begin to wander in ways they never did before. The memories of your own body are fading, but the memories of others remain. The boys who came before you, the boys who came after, the ones who stayed for a season and the ones who never made it that far. They are all part of something larger than you, something older. something more insidious. You know now that this was never just a house. It was an institution, a system, built on the foundation of generations, a tradition that hides behind the idea of honor, of discipline, of Nanshoku, the male beauty that was meant to be both revered and consumed. This wasn't just a house of men. It was a house of power, and that power hasn't disappeared. It has only changed. The world you once knew is still here, beneath the surface, hiding in plain sight. In the streets of Japan, in the gilded halls of the elite, behind the polished doors of corporate boardrooms and government buildings. It's still there, boys and girls taken, traded, sold. It happens every day, but it's covered by a different kind of silk, one that doesn't stain as easily, one that hides abuse in plain sight under the guise of tradition, of culture, of society. There are no open markets anymore, no public auctions, no men who walk among their slaves and weigh them with hungry eyes. No more cart rides through the countryside with boys chained at the ankles. No more cruel whispers in the dark of the brothel's halls. But the systems that feed on bodies still remain. They've just learned how to disguise themselves. The boys who walked the streets of Edo, the ones whose names were erased by the hands of those who control their lives, they have been replaced with another generation. Only this time, their bodies are not paraded in front of philosophers, merchants, or generals. Now, they're hidden behind the closed doors of factories, in back rooms of hotels, in the quiet corners of rich families' lives. Now, it's the children of the poor who vanish from the streets. The children whose parents are desperate enough to sell them, to trade them for money they'll never see again. It's not a coincidence. The system never stopped working. It's just been sanitized, repackaged, covered with the glossy sheen of modernity, the dull sheen of progress. You realize now. The whispers you hear when you step into the streets of the cities in Japan, in China, in other parts of East Asia, are the same. The same murmurs of trade, of power, of the buying and selling of children. The same men who seek youth, who seek beauty, who seek bodies to be used. You hear the stories of missing children, of children who are trafficked, sold, bought, broken, and you hear the justifications. It's tradition, they say. It's a part of culture, and the laws remain vague. The corporations remain silent. The politicians make empty promises. The abuse continues, disguised as something sacred, something cultural, something beyond reproach. But you know better now. You know what's hidden behind the bright smiles of high society. You know what lies beneath the silk robes, beneath the masks of respectability. You know that the same faces that quote Confucius and Mencius, the same faces that talk of virtue and justice, are the ones who participate in this trade. They do it with the same ease as their ancestors. The same ease with which they justified their actions then, they justify them now. And the worst part is, you're not surprised anymore. This isn't just a history story. This isn't some distant, forgotten tragedy from another time. This is a mirror, a reflection of what has always been, what continues to be. And now, as you sit in the dim light of the room, looking at the faded memory of what you once were, you realize that the chains were never truly broken. They were simply reshaped, reforged. His real name was erased. No one remembers it. No one ever will. Not the men who watched him disappear. Not the boys who were left behind, whispering their names like forgotten prayers. His identity was traded before it was ever allowed to breathe. The name he once wore, the name his mother whispered in the dark, became as meaningless as the bruises on his body, as fleeting as the fleeting moments of relief they gave him. You see it now. The pattern. The tragedy that repeats itself over and over, in different forms, in different times. The boy who was given a name that no one wanted to keep. The boy who was sold, who was used, whose life became a performance, a tragedy that was applauded, a crime that was ignored. His pain was entertainment. They watched as he twisted, as he bled, as he was molded into something he never wanted to be. His life, his real life, was buried beneath layers of silk and lacquer, beneath the masks of guests who never cared to know his name. To them, he was a thing to use to consume, a fleeting pleasure that meant nothing when the night ended and the doors closed. but his story still whispers through time. You can hear it in the silence of the streets, in the murmur of the crowds, in the way the air feels thick with unspoken truth. You can hear it in the stories of missing children, in the echo of a life lost to greed, to power, to a world that refused to see them as anything more than objects. His name may have been erased, but his pain lives on. It lives on in every boy who comes after, in every girl who is sold, in every person who stands idly by as the world continues to turn its back on the truth. You cannot erase the stories that are buried in the bones of history. You cannot silence the voices of those who were never given the chance to speak. This was not just a tragedy. It was a crime that was never punished, a crime that was allowed to continue over and over again in the shadows of society, hidden in plain sight. There is no justice for the boy who disappeared, just as there is no justice for those who are still being sold, still being bought, still being broken. The question is, what will you do with the story? What will you do with the story of the boy who was erased? The boy who lived and died without ever being seen as a person, without ever being allowed to hold onto his name, his identity, his soul? What will you do when you hear these stories? When you understand the truth that lies beneath the surface of what society wants to show you? You have a choice now. You can turn away, like so many have before. You can pretend that it's not your problem, that the suffering of others doesn't matter as long as it stays hidden in the dark. Or you can speak. You can share the story. You can make sure that his name is remembered, even if it was never written in any scroll. You can choose to make his pain matter, to make his life matter, to make sure that what happened to him does not happen again. This is where you come in. You have the power to choose, to speak, to remember. What will you do with this story? Will you let it slip into silence like so many others before it? Or will you share it? Will you make his story known? Subscribe to Whispers of Torture and help carry it forward. Don't let it be forgotten. Leave your mark in the comments. Tell us what you're going to do with the truth you've just heard.